Hello, hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking with you about my absolute favorite go-to prize for historical fiction. And it's going to be a little bit different than you may have thought. Or if you know me really well, it's going to be exactly what you thought. If you're new to my channel, then hi, I'm Shelly. I really love books and reading, and I love making videos about books and reading. It's like one of my favorite things. So if you're enjoying the vibe and you would like to subscribe, I would encourage you to do so. Also, thumbs up the video if you feel so inclined, and leave me a comment of the best historical fiction read you have finished in the last month, maybe. I don't know. Or just tell me what you're reading. I don't know. I want to know. I want to hear from you. This is not a one-sided conversation. This is a back and forth, okay? And without any further rambling on, because I've done a little bit of that, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this video. All of the big prizes do not neglect historical fiction. I mean like the big literary prizes. So we got the Booker, we have the Pulitzer, we have the Women's Prize for Fiction. Those are like the biggest ones, I think. I'm sorry if you have a prize in mind that I didn't mention, but all three of them have, had a history of including historical fiction reads, and I think some of the prizes of those three prizes are more inclined to historical fiction reads than others. For example, the Pulitzer has a ton of historical fiction works on their backlist, partly because the Pulitzer likes to focus on American literature, or literature written by an American about American life. That's essentially what the prize is all about. And when we think about American life, often it's American life in the past. And the Women's Prize does a great job, always on their long list, including a grand handful of historical fiction reads. So those are some lists one could look into if you're into historical fiction like I am. And then we have the pièce de résistance, the pinnacle of historical fiction prizes, and that is the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. This prize has been going on since 2010, and shockingly, I have only read 5 books from the shortlist and winners of that prize. The 5 books are the Hilary Mantel series about Thomas Cromwell, so Wolf Hall, Bring Up the Bodies, The Mirror and the Light. 2 of those won. The Bring Up the Bodies was the only one that was shortlisted that didn't win out of that trilogy. I've also read The Luminaries, and this year I have read The Fraud by Zadie Smith. And actually, I don't think The Fraud was good enough to have made the long list shortlist of the Walter Scott Prize. I did not like that book. I actually reviewed it, so I will leave my review of that book down below. So I'm not actually talking about the Walter Scott Prize for Fiction, and every time I think, maybe I should read some more of the Walter Scott Prize for Fiction, I say, no girl, no, back away. Back away from that thought. Because partly I don't trust the prize. Partly I don't trust the prize because of including Zadie Smith's book, which I just don't think was a very good book. And partly because of this other list that I'm going to share with you now. And the list is Steve Donoghue's best of list for historical fiction. Steve Donoghue is a book critic, and he writes written reviews. He's blurbed on books. He's that guy. He also has a YouTube channel, and he has a long-standing Steve Reads blog. Steve is great. But what's possibly even more great than Steve himself are his book recommendations. His recommendations are phenomenal, partly because, if not solely because, he does not have to do it. He doesn't have to recommend books to us. He does it purely from the goodness of his heart. Well, I actually don't know his motivations, but I'm guessing it's purely from the goodness of his heart. And also, he has a true interest in this genre, so that's the second thing. He likes historical fiction. It's one of his main genres. It's always been one of his main genres. He wrote for the Historical Fiction Society back in the day. He might even still write for them. I don't really know all of the venues he writes for. But he's read a ton of historical fiction. So it's a genre he likes. He doesn't have to do it. That's the second thing. And the third thing is that he reads over 1,000 books a year. if not more than 1,500 books a year. I mean, anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 books every single year. And a huge chunk of that is historical fiction. And he reads with a critical eye. He's reading for readers. He's reading in order to see how good a book is, to see if it's worth being recommended. Okay? So this is the person who originates these lists, or who writes these lists. And I have read a ton of Steve Donoghue recommendations, and for the most part, they have not failed me. They are grand recommendations. And he always comes up with a really varied and interesting list. Now, I will say, this is my only slight caveat, is that some years he doesn't have a best of historical fiction list. And I'll talk about the way he orders his list too. Some years he just has a literary fiction or a best of fiction, and in that he has some contemporary and some historical fiction. And for that, I just wonder if he didn't have 20 books to highlight for that year that he really loved, 10 in historical fiction and 10 in, contemporary fiction, or set in contemporary times, and 10 set in historical times. So sometimes he doesn't have that. But if you read through his best of fiction, if he's missing a historical fiction list, it's wow, I'm really getting in the weeds, y'all. You can read, and he always mentions the setting, and you can just feel that you can derive from his blurbs that when he writes the one or two sentences about why it made the list, that if you can tell from those moments in those sentences where the book is set, when it's set, and all that stuff. So you can very much glean the historical fiction from that. Which ones are historical fictions and which ones are not. My goodness, that was a mouthful for me. And so whenever I think about, these other historical fiction books that are highlighted with more, more hailed prizes, every time I think, maybe I'll read a couple of historical fiction books from the Women's Prize, long list, short list, the winner. I kind of go back to like, well, what if but Steve probably read all of them. Like, I would rather read a Steve Donoghue recommended book. I just would. And so here's how he does his list, and then we'll go through the 2023 list together. I hope this is at least somewhat enlightening for some of you, and I will leave the list linked down below. And I will leave a couple of years' lists linked down below. So you can give it a gander and enjoy looking. So the way he orders his list is that his number one book is the number one book for that year. It's the best. And anywhere 2 through 10, there's no order. Now, I kind of wonder, this is just me wondering, not from Steve, but this is me wondering, like, I wonder if there is kind of a loose ordering that, 4 is maybe better than 10 or 2 is better than 10. But he says that there's no order. And I don't think he likes to get into the weeds of because even when I order my best of list, it's sort of like, some of them can change their order depending on how I'm feeling that month, that week, that year. When I look back, which ones have stuck with me, so on and so forth. So, so I understand not dedicating oneself to the 2 through 10 order, but his number one is the number one. So we're going to go through this list together. I will also leave the list link down below. He always writes a sentence or 2 or even 3 about the work itself and maybe where it falls in the author's catalog. And, it's a very informative list. And it's honestly one that I carry with me. I've learned to be discerning as to which books, I'm more likely going to enjoy. Like, I choose for myself among this list, as I would with any prize. I don't follow any prize blindly. But I also am more willing to take a risk on a Steve Donoghue recommended historical fiction best of book than a Booker historical fiction best of book or long listed book. I just would. And I thought I would share that with you all. And y'all know that I really, Steve Donoghue's recommendations they have transformed my reading in a lot of ways. Doesn't mean I only read his recommended stuff, but it has made me the reader that I am today. And it has informed so many of my choices. And it has enriched my reading life so much. And for that, I am incredibly grateful. So, before I get too mushy, we're going to go through the list. Boy, I really went on a tangent there. So the first book is Jo Baker's The Midnight News. Now, Jo Baker is known for her book Longborn. Now she has come out with a new historical fiction novel set in 1940 war-torn London, following a young woman who's trying to hold down a job and doing her best through a bunch of hardships, muddling through the ickiness of life while the Blitz is going on. And then she comes to think that there's danger lurking around every corner and that it's specifically targeting her. Steve says that this is Jo Baker's best work. Number 9 is a book from an author that I actually recognize, and I was like, that guy doesn't write historical fiction, and then Steve clears it up in his writing, in his own little blurb about the book. He said, so the author is James Lee Burke, and James Lee Burke, from what I know, writes mystery thriller, sort of pew pew books about, I don't know, I feel like he writes manly man books. He's there with Tom Clancy, even though that's probably totally not even true. But that's kind of where I categorize him in my mind. I'm like, he doesn't write books for, women of a certain age. And so I was interested to see that his name made the list, and best of for historical fiction too. So it's called Flags on the Bayou. And he even says this is a total departure from James Lee Burke's long-running series that everybody knows him for. And it is going to be a moody and atmospheric action drama set set in Civil War era Louisiana in 1863. And I was like, oh, okay, well that's kind of cool. So this author has turned his talents away from what everybody knows him for towards something that is a little more of a risk for him. It wasn't until I read Steve's description of this book did it actually start to pique my interest, because the cover is a bit unassuming and the title seems kind of boring. It's called The Auburn Conference, and I was like, anything about a conference sounds pretty terrible, but it's a speculative piece. And I was like, I haven't actually read a lot of speculative fiction. And then here's what it's about. And it actually sounds kind of amazing. This is by Tom Piazza, by the way. So it's about a conference set in 1883 in upstate New York. And it's a writers' conference. And it's being attended by Herman Melville, Mark Twain, Frederick Douglass, Walt Whitman, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and a few others. These amazing writers of American literature. And Steve says that it's a super enjoyable read for those who are willing to suspend their disbelief. So obviously this conference really didn't happen, but if one is willing to go there in their imagination, then it is well worth it. And I was like, I think I'm able to go there. I want to be able to go there. And after reading about it through Steve's little writing about it, I was like, that sounds actually really good. Why is nobody talking about this book? This next book sounds like an adventure story / love story, and it's called The World and All It Holds, and it's by Alexander Heumann. Now, it's following the events of Franz Ferdinand of Cervejo. It's his assassination in 1914, which is what propels the main character towards this adventure and adventuresome love story. That's what it sounds like, at least. The next book is one that I've actually talked about quite a bit on my channel because I want to read it. And it is The Princess by Wendy Holden. This is her third book in the Royal Outsiders series. The first one is The Royal Governess, which I read last month and I thought was really, really, really enjoyable, which follows the childhood of Queen Elizabeth II through the eyes of her, what is the word? Her nanny. I can't remember the actual word right now. I'm sure it will come to me. Her governess. That would be the word. Oh my goodness, Shelley. Okay. The second book is one that I need to read, and it is The Duchess, and that's also, it's going to be from the perspective of Wallis Simpson, who is an American socialite who gets entangled with the British royal family and is truly a vile character from what I know about Wallis Simpson. And then this third book, which is what made Steve's list for this year. Actually, the other two have made Steve's list, but this is the third one, and it's also made Steve's list. And it is about Princess Diana, which I remember, her impact, I would say, in my own childhood, because she was still being talked about in my childhood. And number 5 is The Sparrow by James Hines, or Sparrow, not The Sparrow, Sparrow by James Hines. Now, Steve says the best part of this book are the well-drawn characters, and I love a good character. I love a good character development. I like great characters. I am a mega character-driven reader. That is one of my favorite things to read for. And so this is set in a Spanish brothel on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, and it's going to our leading character is a young slave who's called Sparrow, who's being raised by the staff and the women of this brothel. And it's a very, loving and wonderful book, according to Steve, and it's definitely caught my attention. The next book, Steve says, is the third in a series, and so I'm very glad that that's noted, because I don't want to go out and buy like the third book in a series and start there. So it's actually The Temple of Fortuna by Elodie Harper. This is the third book in the Wolf Den trilogy, and the only book to actually make Steve's list, but he says that it basically has a rip-roaring ending to the trilogy, and I was like, that sounds amazing. And the book that I have been wanting is the first book, the Wolf Den book, but I haven't gotten my hands on it yet. There are a lot of books that I want. This is one of the many. So I'll just have to wait, and it's set in Pompeii in 79 AD. The next book sounds like a bit of fun, and it is Sally Braden's Italian Adventure by Christina Lynch. Now, this is about a boisterous gossip columnist who is trapped in Italy during World War II. And he says that there's oversized and melodramatic characters, which I love, and it just sounds like the perfect palate cleanser. Number 4 is the second book in a series by Dan Jones, who is a historian turned novelist. And again, I'm really glad that Steve notes the order in the series and puts it in his little write-up. But the first book in this series is Essex Dogs, which I had never heard of. And then this is the follow-up to that. And what we're doing is that we're following some English mercenaries who are a part of the Normandy invasion in 1346. And then Steve, he mentions that this has hilarious dialogue and witty, cinema-ready characters and neck-break violence. But the first two really got me, because when Steve says something is hilarious, he really means it. He used a similar description, or maybe he used the words like sharp banter or something like that, but for The Trees by Percival Everett, which I loved The Trees by Percival Everett, and it did indeed have super sharp, witty dialogue, and that was one of my favorite parts of the book. Now, the number 1 book is one that I bought, but I actually don't have it with me right now. But the number 1 book of his 2023 edition of this prize, essentially, this prize list, that's how I like to think of it as, and it is The Glutton by A.K. Blakemore. He said it is the strangest and certainly best historical novels of the year, and he says it is a weirdly beautiful tale of intensely ugly things, and it's set in 18th century France, and it follows the story of the glutton of Lyon named Tarare, and I have read about 30 pages of it, and it is really good. It's dark and atmospheric and interesting and has a good balance of light and dark so far. Who knows what the next, I don't know, it's not a super long book, so who knows what the next 270 pages will hold. But so far, it captures my attention. He likens this to Patrick Susskind's Perfume. And so, he says it's sort of a quirky genius of a book, and so far, I can't disagree with him, because it is quirky and weird. But I'll let you know how it goes when I actually finish the book. So yeah, that's it. I was so happy to bring this list to you, to talk it through with you, to finally admit to you and everyone else that this is the list that I follow for the whole year until the next one comes out. And I revisit it, I pull it up on my phone when I am shopping, I think about some of the books, and I start to order the first book in the series like I did with the royal governess so that I can eventually get to the princess. Dan Jones's Wolves of Winter sounds amazing. The one about the Sally Braden's, what is it called? It's Sally Braden's Italian Adventure sounds like the perfect palate cleanser. Like, I really want to get my hands on The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper, or L.O.D. Harper. You know, there are so many that sounds good, and there are some that I think that are more aligned to my taste than others, and those are the ones that I'm putting higher up on my list. And there are ones that are going to take me a little bit outside my comfort zone, but I trust that all of these books are going to be well written, especially if they are being recommended by somebody who reads literally over 1,000 books a year. Yeah. And so, you know, for that, I'm so grateful to Steve for enriching my reading life by putting out lists like this one, lists such as this one, and much more. And hopefully I was able to bring to your attention some of the books on this list that you might really enjoy or that might pique your attention. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know what's going on in your reading life. Please share. I shared, it's your turn, and that's it from me. So thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. And without any further rambling on, well, what? I like the wrong transition. I just need to go. Okay, bye.